taste about 5 to 6 wines, right? So you want to select what wines you want to taste. Now basically, the company will decide for the most part which wines they want to promote. And that list will pretty much stay similar. It'll change maybe every 6 months or so. So you guys all got to be aware of which are the wines that the company wants to promote. And those are the wines always. Or if you want to do a tasting at the tasting room, you got to taste the wines that are not moving, that are the slow-moving wines, the wines that you want to move. Stuff like that. Always, that's the priority for you. The wines that are your fastest moving, your most popular, oftentimes you don't want to taste that. You want to taste your other wines, which are your slightly slow-moving ones, which are the wines you want to move. Or you want to taste the wines that are the most profitable. So those are sort of the two factors that come into it. Anytime you launch a new wine, you want to taste that wine. Anytime you launch a new wine. So for example, later on this year we will be launching our Rosé Sparkling. So it's like a tsunami, but it's a rosé. And then definitely all the tastings that we'll do for 6 months to a year after that, we want to be tasting the rosé. Okay, let's move on to display. What we're doing here,
Sorry, which ones are your most profitable and the slowest moving?
Okay, so in general, right now I would suggest one Madeira, any one.
Those are the slow moving ones, the Madeira.
No, not necessarily, but you want to use one out of your Madeira range. Yeah. Or just the ones that you want to sell the most. So you would normally go ahead and do a tasting with Shannon. You want to choose between Cab Shiraz and Satori. You generally want to choose one of them. That normally the company will decide. Recently, over the last year, it's been Cab Shiraz that we've been emphasizing more and not Satori as much because the cost of our Satori went up. So it wasn't like something that we wanted to emphasize too much. But now things are going to change, and in the rest of India, we're going to go back to tasting Satori and we're going to cool down on Cab Shiraz. Dindori, you want to taste when it's a high-end paid tasting. If it's just a regular tasting, which is especially free tastings, etc., no Dindori. Or you might want to consider, if you're doing it at the wine bar or something, charging a supplement for a premium wine like Dindori. Anytime you want to taste a premium wine, you got to give the people the option and say you can pay a slight extra fee and the pay. This is a wine that we find doesn't move very easily from the shops if somebody has not tasted it. We have this family here, Arshad, Varsi and Maria, and they were just, somebody offered them a glass of the late harvest and they loved it. And they're complete fans and they've gone and bought a bottle. Now what we found also at our tasting room in Nasik is that people who taste the late harvest love the late harvest. If you don't taste it, you have no idea what late harvest Chenin Blanc means on a shelf. It's a little expensive. It's half bottle, which is a little expensive, so you're a little reluctant to buy it. So always taste your late harvest Chenin. Try to also taste sparkler as the weather we drink. Normally you want to taste your sparkling stuff. You want the Sula brand to be very prominent, very visible. In general, try not to use Forton buckets if you're doing a Sula tasting. If you're doing a Forton tasting or something, use that instead. Try to use Sula buckets as much as possible. Try to have maybe one bottle on each table so people have the label, the bottle right in front of them while they're doing it. If you're doing a tasting and you've got a table like this, you want to line up all your wines in front of you, and each wine that you want to taste, you want to lift it up. You want to show it to everyone really prominently that, okay, this is the wine that you're tasting right now. What happens quite often, you go ahead and you're tasting and you're so used to the fact that, you know, this is Chenin Blanc, this is Sauvignon Blanc, you just forget about the fact that, hey, this person doesn't even know what that bottle looks like. And that's a lot of people who are going to be tasting, we don't even know what the bottle looks like. So if it's hidden here inside your buckets, no one is going to know what that bottle looks like. So make sure, let's say I'm tasting a Cab Shiraz, I want to lift it up, I want to show it to everyone really prominently, and then I want to place it in a place here while I'm doing the tasting so that everyone is watching it the whole time and knows that this is exactly the bottle that we're tasting. If someone is going around to the tables and pouring, you want to make sure when you go to the table and pour, let's start with the first wine. Yeah, let's start with our Madeira wine. Okay, I'm going to step back for a second. So What you want to do before the tasting is open each and every bottle that you're going to be tasting. You never want to commit the error of tasting a corked wine. It really screws you. So don't do that. Just take a little bit. If you're the guy who's doing the tasting, take a little bit in your glass and taste it before you start pouring it to everyone else. And that's totally fine. This is our spit bucket. Yeah. Okay, so you want to, so let's now get back into pre-tasting preparation. All the bottles totally chilled 10 to 15 minutes before your tasting starts. All your bottles open, all your bottles tasted. Have an extra bottle of each one in hand just in case you're going to have a problem with the cork bottle. And it happens a lot. Estimates say that up to 5% of all bottles are corked. Up to 5%, somewhere in between 1 to 5%. That means if you're going to do a tasting with 20 bottles of wine, there's a good chance that at least one of those bottles is going to be corked. Sometimes you'll get 1 out of 10 even. Hopefully, you know, we as a company have been having less and less problems with corked bottles. If you remember 5 and 6 years ago, the kinds of problems we had, I think we were up to like 7 or 8% of bottles were corked. But ever since we changed suppliers and we've been doing our own tests on the corks that come in at the winery, we're having much fewer problems. But still, you should expect 2 to 3% corkage. And the worst thing you can do is taste a corked wine with people. So, all wines ready and chilled, all wines tasted, proper glasses at each place at the table, spit bucket, spittoon, whatever you call it, water. What we're missing right now is glasses of water. Everyone needs to have water while they're tasting. What's going to happen, if you're tasting 8 wines, you're going to get horribly dehydrated. And there's a lot of people who are not going to want to spit wines out, they're going to be drinking. And if you're drinking lunchtime, early evening, during a tasting time, you don't have water there, you're going to be very drunk very soon, and it's not going to be that enjoyable after. You're going to forget everything. So you don't want that. So you want bottles of water or carafes of water with glasses, water glasses on each, where everyone is tasting. So what I'm going to suggest, Robert, let's get somebody to get some water over here now. Okay, so spittoons, wines chilled, opened, tasted, water, these are the main things that you need. Then bottles displayed nicely in a prominent place. Possibly if you've got people, if you've got a big room like when we did the Hilton tasting of all the Rotarian people, keep a bottle on each table, just make sure you pick them up.
Sorry, you can't touch us. Very sorry, you're allowed to. Not allowed to.
Not from here, never from here, always from down here, right? Or you can even, some people can hold it like this also, but about here, get a firm grip on it. If the bottle's wet and all, use a napkin because it might slip. Keep the label facing out, right? So when you're pouring, don't have the label covered up. Keep the label facing out, and as you approach the table, you want to show everyone the bottle, right? You want to show them the label and say the Madeira, just say it out, you know, fairly loud, the Madeira white, and then you want to pour about this much, and that's about it. That's a pourer portion. Okay, how many ml is that about? 30, 40 ml. You can go up a little bit. You can go to this, but you don't want to go too much. Okay, now the reason for this is not necessarily because we want to conserve wine, but this is the best way for anyone to taste, because this is the way that allows them to swirl the wine in the glass and get all of the aroma. You can always tell them that, look, if you've got a certain number of bottles allocated for the tasting, tell them up front, say, we're only going to taste 50 ml of wine, of each wine. Afterwards, if there's wine left over, you're very welcome to help yourselves, but for the time being, we're just going to start with that. So just, why don't you go ahead and just pour 50 ml for each person. Do we have another bottle of this? We just have one of each.
No, we have another. We have 2 of each.
Thank you.
Okay, you can even pour a little bit less than that, okay? Yeah. So let's, while the wine is being poured, let's, is your tulip shape. So what you want is a glass that starts small, goes out broad, and then comes back in, right? So you always want to taste in a glass like that. Why are you doing that? basically it concentrates the aroma of the wine up into your nose. Whereas if you taste with a glass that starts like this and then goes flat, half your aroma goes away. Here you can shove your whole nose into the glass, which is the way that you want to taste. And you get the whole bouquet of the wine. So you always go for a glass like this. Now we're using 2 glasses. In general, bigger glasses red wine, smaller glasses white wine. That's the way you do a restaurant service as well. That in this glass. If you're tasting sparkling wine and you don't have champagne glasses, and there's no need really, you can taste sparkling wine in a wine glass as well, but just make sure you use a white wine glass. Okay, so does everyone have some? Yeah, give me some. What I'm not doing right now is infusing humor into the thing, but when you do a tasting with people, you want to make sure that it's a light-hearted taste. So you want to keep putting stuff in there, cracking jokes and stuff like that. Feeling, that, oh, this is a cool, fun Sula wine experience. That's very important. So don't get too serious. I'm a little serious right now because we're doing the training session. But when you're doing tastings, smile on your face, be very cool, be very easy. You don't have to answer the questions that everyone throws at you. 1 out of every 4 questions or so, just throw a funny answer back at them. You don't have to answer everything perfectly straight and narrow and totally seriously. So I think who was there at the Hilton tasting that I did? You watched that. So you'll realize the way I work the crowd during that. Very important. You build a rapport with the crowd, they're always going to remember the tasting and the afternoon as much as the wine. The wine taste, people kind of forget. They'll remember 1 or 2 wines out of 8 wines that they really like, and they'll be like, okay, that's the one that I want. Okay, so let's move into the actual tasting. What you want to emphasize to people is that they want to be using all their senses. Okay, so now I'm going to stop training and we're actually going to get into doing a tasting. So we're tasting Madeira White. This is a very easy drinking table wine. As you can see, it's a white wine made from white grapes, made from Nasik. If you look at the label, it tells you that it's a Nasik Valley table wine, which means basically that all the grapes are from Nasik. But there's no varietal labeling, so it's not specifically a Chenin Blanc or a Sauvignon Blanc, etc. It's just a blend of grapes. It's an everyday drinking wine, and because it's not a varietal wine, it's a little bit less expensive. It's more of a value wine, but still a very nice wine. Start out with taking a look at the color of the wine. And Sujit, what would you call this color? Okay, we're going to move into it. In fact, all our white wines, so just take that as the constant color, the Sula's white wines, whether it's Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc or Madeira White. Actually, if you compare the colors of all 3, they're very similar. The big difference is that the Sauvignon Blanc, and in fact the Madeira White, because there is a little Sauvignon Blanc in Madeira White, has a slight greenish tinge to it. If you look at it, it's just slightly green, which you will not see on the Chenin Blanc. The Chenin Blanc is a little bit more golden, but in general, pale straw is the best way to describe the wine. Okay, so you want to enjoy the wine visually. That's important. You want to enjoy the color, especially in the case of red wines. You want to enjoy that deep, dark red color. In the case of white wines, color isn't as important, but still it has a role to play. So after you look at sight, the next sense that is your nose, is the aroma of the wine. So first and foremost, you put basically your nose into the glass. You don't sniff from here. You let your nose go into the glass and just take a nice deep breath. Okay, now you're going to swirl the wine in the glass. What you're going to do basically is you're opening up the wine, you're opening the aromas. Aromas are James Bond, martini, shaken not stirred. What that does is it opens up all those esters and gets all those aromas coming out.
Like what flavors, what you look at.
What do you call the attack? Yeah, so what kind of attack do you think this nose has? Green apple is not a bad description at all. Slightly citrusy, grassy, slightly grassy. Yeah. Now, aroma smell is always slightly subjective as well. Are we really pumping up the music? Is there some reason volume is going up and down? Are there different volumes on this important thing? Okay, so you swirl it. So the way to swirl it, you go like this and you make sure that it doesn't fall on your thing. And there's a beginner's way of swirling the wine, which is you keep it down here, flat on the table, and swirl it like this. That's a really easy way to do it. And you want to get it up and then stuff your nose in and take a deep whiff. And it opens things up. Okay, so now we're ready to take a sip. Okay, and now just remember, when you take a sip, you don't want to take a small sip. You want to take a nice amount into your mouth, enough that basically can go all around your mouth, wet your whole palate, up, down, back, front, top of the tongue, bottom of the tongue, and just enjoy the full sensation in your mouth. So what you don't want to be doing while drinking wine is like a shot where you take it and it goes straight down. It's got to go everywhere, all around, and that's really what brings out all the flavors. So, cheers.
Get the most out of the wine.
Yeah, so generally, that's a good point. What you want to do is it's a little difficult to breathe in through your nose when you're sipping. What you normally do, you open up your mouth a little bit and you make a noise like this and bring air in along with your sip of wine. Now let's not forget which sense have we not covered here. We did sight, nose and taste. So there's always the cheers, which brings pleasure to the ears. And so there's a reason why you hold your glass from the stem and you don't hold it from there, just hold it from here. You can just see what it sounds like when you do cheers like that. It's not quite the same. So it's much nicer when you hold it from down here and you get a nice ringing cheers out of that. Getting into that. So there's a second reason why you don't hold the wine like this, which is that your hand has a lot of heat. Yeah, ladies, we're getting ahead of ourselves. You have a lot of heat in your hands. If you hold your hand like this, especially in a climate like ours in Bombay, your wine will get really warm before you realize it, especially with white wine. So you always want to hold it from down here. Okay, and that's the main reason why you hold it, not just the cheers of it. Okay, now you can take the wine totally in, or you can spit it out. I want to let them know that before they drink. Most times, tastings here, most people will drink. Okay, so flavors we're getting from this wine.
Citrusy.
I think citrusy, lemony, it works. Actually, Madeira White is a blend of a little bit of Chenin, a little bit of Sauvignon. There's a whole bunch of wines in there. There's smaller percentages of those. So you will get notes of Chenin and Sauvignon also in Madeira White. And how many of you tasted Madeira White recently? It's actually a very pleasant white wine. It is possibly the best value wine in the market today. At 220 rupees for a white Caucasian like this, that's fantastic. Taste it. Taste it against other whites, by other producers in the market, and you'll find that this white more than holds its own. So it's a great everyday drinking thing. It's only 220 bucks in the market.
It's not too sweet.
Right. So you want to make sure that you talk a little bit about price, because people are always interested in what the price of the wine is. Obviously, that's the main thing that starts getting to them. So when you're talking about the wine, again, show it to them. So this is the Madeira White. This is what we just tasted, and this is 200. How much is it? 195. Is that right? What's it gone up? So this wine has an MRP of 195 rupees, so it's available generally with sales tax for about 210, and it's just a great value wine. Now, from your point of view, once I'm getting into this, you have to start pouring your next wine. Because otherwise, there'll be a lull. So now, why don't you pour the next wine? Let's pour the Madeira Rosé. Did you say Sula Chenin Blanc? Announce the wine when you approach a table. Come to the table, show the wine, say this is a Sula Chenin Blanc, and then start pouring.
Present you Sula Chenin Blanc.
Once I've gotten 3/4, guys, please listen. Once we've gotten 3/4 into the way of talking about a wine, once we've finished, done with the tasting, and I'm going on and people are asking questions, start with the next wine. Start moving it through and announcing. Then I will tell everyone. So the wine that we have is the producers of Chenin Blanc in India. We pioneered this. We pioneered Sauvignon Blanc. We pioneered Zinfandel. In fact, we have really been in the forefront of bringing all these new varieties and new methods of winemaking to India. So this is a pretty important wine that we're tasting. This is the first Chenin Blanc and Sauvignon Blanc were the first two wines that we produced and the first two wines that we launched in 2000 when we sold our first bottle. Most of you are familiar with this wine. Again, let's go through, take a look at the color is quite similar to the Madeira White. Again, a very pale white straw color. Now this is important, this is something you want to talk about, which is that in general, for a young, fresh, fruity white wine, you want the color to be pale. You know, Indians love gold, but in the case of white wine, gold is not best. All that glitters is not gold. So what you want is a much paler color. Oftentimes what happens when a wine becomes that golden color, it basically shows that it's become oxidized. So it's been somehow exposed to oxygen, it's been stored for too long, and you will taste that oxidized nature of the wine when you taste it. So you much prefer a pale, yellow, straw-colored wine, except there are certain wines that are exceptions. There are certain Chardonnays where you would expect to find a slightly more golden color, and then later on in our tasting, at the end, we're going to be tasting our dessert wine, and in general, dessert wines have a deep golden color. But Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc, all of these varieties, you generally want to see a very nice pale straw color. So
why is it this color? Because the grapes are this color, or?
Yeah, I mean the way the wine comes out in the beginning is a much lighter color.
It's more delicate.
Yeah.
As it ages, it gets more.
So just a note about the way this wine is made. Almost all our wines are made fully in stainless steel, and they're all cold fermented wines. Also, in the case of Chenin Blanc and Sauvignon Blanc, our grapes are pressed very gently in whole clusters, and therefore you get a much gentler pressing, you get a much more delicate, nicer juice basically, and that makes a more beautiful wine later on. So just something to keep in mind, everything made in stainless steel and whole cluster pressed and cold fermented. And most neutral medium, what it does, therefore, it allows the fruit to fully express itself without giving anything else artificial in the flavor. When you use oak barrels, yes, oak gives a very pleasing aroma and taste, but in the end, it is something extraneous to the wine. It's something that you're adding from outside. You're adding oak, basically. In this, what you get is the purest expression of the wine. In India, also in other countries, wood is much more prone to bacterial infection and stuff like that. Clean perfectly, and so you never get problems with microbial infections and stuff in your wine down the road. So that's why we much prefer stainless steel. It's much more expensive than any other medium. You know, in France, some of the wineries still use old concrete tanks. Now we just don't do any of that. Sula vineyards, very state-of-the-art, very high-end machinery. Everything has been done for super state-of-the-art and clean. want to comment on the taste? First and foremost, the basic, without getting into descriptions.
It's a very light, easy to drink wine.
Yeah, and it is fruity and
Sweeter?
yeah, so it's slightly sweet. It is not 100% dry wine. This Chenin Blanc is slightly sweet. It's not too sweet, it's not cloyingly sweet. It's just the right amount of sugar to make it just a beautiful aperitif wine. Also, what that sweetness does is it cuts the spice in spicy food. It's very important when you're eating spicy food to have a wine with a little bit of residual sugar in it or a lot of fruit to it. It really helps you cut spice that much better. So with our cuisine in general being so spicy, Chenin Blanc, a nice chilled glass of Chenin Blanc is just a great accompaniment. Now just a word on pairing food and wine. Basically you want to pair like with like. So if you have a sauce that's slightly sweet, you know, for instance, Thai food. A lot of Thai food, you know, is you got that little bit of that coconut-based, you know, sweetish sauce, peanut-based sauces. Like in a pad Thai, for example, most pad Thais that you taste will be sweet. And Chenin Blanc just goes fantastically well with a dish like pad Thai.
Yeah,
So
green Thai curry because that's slightly sweet.
yeah. Green Thai, yeah, can be sometimes you can make it spicy without being sweet as well. In general, musuman is almost always sweet. So that's also again something that goes really well with this. So this whole myth that Indian wine goes with only with lager beer, etc., was a myth done by the English when they were here, basically because the English didn't drink a lot of wine, as opposed to all places where the French colonize the places. You'll find they drink wine no matter what the cuisine is, and so more and more people are starting to realize that wine in fact goes really well with Indian food. But we're still discovering which wine goes well with which cuisine because we have 100 different cuisines in our country. But Chenin Blanc in particular, very versatile. Gujarati food, fantastic. You know, your slightly sweet curries, very good. Yeah, Fatima?
What kind of fruits would you say that this is? I mean, you can say it's fruity, but what kind of fruit?
What kind of fruit would you say?
I mean, I taste a bit of strawberry, for example.
Strawberry now, you know, when we taste our rosé later, our blush zin,
That's
much more strawberry, like just full of strawberries. This one, again, a little bit more on the citrus side. And tending a little bit towards pineapple, but again, once you taste the late harvest dessert wine, you'll find how pineapple that is. Let's start pouring the Sauvignon Blanc now as I'm coming to the end of the Chenin Blanc. So let's get somebody else to, Swati, would you like to pour? So Chenin Blanc is so named because it's made out of the Chenin Blanc grape. Seems kind of logical, but there's a lot of people who don't necessarily know it, so it's a good point to talk about. Sauvignon Blanc is actually made out of the Sauvignon Blanc grape. The Chenin Blanc grape lends itself really well to be made in a fruity, what we call an off-dry style. Everyone's still on board here? People getting tired?
I can't take a sip, sorry.
Left profile, please. Left profile.
Come on. No, I don't think my family will kill me if they ever see you.
Supposed to dry.
No. Anyone? Sujit? Neil? How do you make a wine? Please listen to me when I'm talking. How do you make a wine sweet and sweet?
Yes, that's on the harvest.
During the harvest.
You harvest it earlier, it will be less sweet.
Okay. It actually, no, we'll talk about the way that the Chenin Blanc is made. It doesn't have anything to do with the grape. No. What happens is what happens when you make a grape into wine. Basically, the sugar in the grape gets converted once you add yeast to alcohol. That's the basic fermentation process. So what happens is you have a certain amount of sugar in each grape. You can either choose during the winemaking process to convert that entire sugar in the grape into alcohol, or you can stop the fermentation process. Normally the way we do that is by freezing down suddenly to 0 degrees or below zero the stainless steel tank, and that shocks the yeast, kills the yeast, and stops the fermentation process before all the sugar, the natural sugar in the grape, has converted to alcohol. So there are two things to remember in this. There is no sugar added to this wine. That's a very important point, and even diabetics and everyone like that should know this point. So there's no sugar added. It's just the natural sweetness in the grape. So what we've done in this case is we've kept what's called 15 grams of sugar per liter of wine. We've kept in the wine, so we've not converted all the sugar into alcohol.
Therefore, it's a drier.
Therefore, it's a sweeter wine.
No, but can this then, if you don't stop,
If you don't stop it, it'll become dry. Dry means not sweet.
so if you don't stop, it becomes dry.
It becomes, it will, all the sugar will get. So two things happen when you stop fermentation. One is a little bit of the natural sugar remains, so it remains sweet. There's a second thing that happens, which is since all the sugar is not being converted into alcohol, the alcohol is slightly lower than for grapes picked at the same ripeness for a wine that becomes dry. So Chenin Blanc is generally about 1% less alcohol than Sauvignon Blanc. Why is that important? You can drink more of it. So feel free to down 2-3 glasses. Don't limit yourself to one glass of this wine, because one glass will probably not make you drunk. So drink more and buy more. That's only in the case of late harvest. All right, so we're on to the Sauvignon Blanc now. Has everyone got that? Okay, you're going to be quizzed on this later on. All right, all those who fail will be sent to work in Patna for a month. So please be careful. So we're on to white wine grapes. In the last 5 years, it's seen a huge resurgence, being led mainly by the New Zealand style of Sauvignon Blanc. Our style is a little different. It's a very distinct style. It's been raising eyebrows all over the world. This wine is served in some of Alain Ducasse's restaurants in France. He is the world's probably top chef and restaurateur. So it's served in Michelin star restaurants all over the world. We export this wine to France, in fact, and it sells for about 13 euros in very tony wine stores in France. So always worth mentioning that. And it's just a beautiful wine that just shows that India is a fantastic place for Sauvignon Blanc. Let's take a swig of this. It's a dry wine. It's been fermented completely to dryness. So also it's slightly higher in alcohol, therefore, than the Chenin Blanc. It's a little bit tart, and therefore it's a great wine to pair with food. If I were to choose an aperitif wine, I would always choose the Chenin Blanc as an aperitif wine. If I were to choose which wine I want to pair with, with any sorts of very cuisine, I would always go with the Sauvignon Blanc, because it's got so many different flavor profiles happening in there. Plus it's got the spice, so it stands up well to spicy food. Chenin Blanc is not as spicy, it's slightly sweet, but that sweetness also stands up to spicy food. It cuts spice. Spice also stands up to spicy food. So that's just something, it's a little complicated, but it's just something to keep in mind. Goes really well with any sorts of green herbs, with coriander in particular. In fact, I taste now. You get away from fruit profiles when you taste this wine, and you go more into vegetable profiles. And there's definitely a green pepper, so like a Simla Mirch type of aroma and taste going on there, almost tending in the more spicy batches towards green chili. And therefore it also holds its own really well with food that has green chili in it.
Does this age well or not? What is the aging thing of these?
The wines that we've tasted so far are meant to be drunk young.
Right, yeah.
These are not wines that you want to put down into a wine cabinet and store for 2 years. No, you want to buy them because you want to drink them. They're not going to necessarily age that well. They're made to move off the shelves and be drunk. Now it's interesting to note that 95% of wines that are bought in the world are drunk within 1 day of them being bought. It's barely 5% of the wines that are bought in the world that are actually laid down and kept beyond 1 day. In most cases, you order from your wine shop the day you want the wine, or maybe a day before if you're having a big party, or you go to the supermarket, you pick the wine off the shelf, which is the wine that you're going to drink. that night itself. So most wines are bought to be drunk that day itself. Very few wines, only the really expensive high-end wines are really bought to be put down. So these are wines that are made to drink immediately, and that's the way that you prefer them. When you're buying Sauvignon Blanc, you always want to look for the latest vintage. You don't want to look for an old vintage. So let's move on and start pouring the Zin. So Amog, have you all well? I'm just doing a tasting here. So now you're not doing that right. Listen, Amog, were you listening? Right? That's easy enough.
Yeah.
You're showing the label and your hand is not blocking the label. And then you pour.
Blush Zinfandel.
Yeah. Just make sure before you pour into a glass, guys, very important, if somebody has, guys, Swati, this is like, what is it?
Especially when there's very different wines coming about. There should be cleaning of the glass.
Yes. Okay. So in this case, in fact, when moving from Sauvignon Blanc is a very distinctive tasting wine. Often not a bad idea at all to rinse the glass after that. So you can ask people to do a little rinse with water, or in fact, if there's a bunch of you tasting informally, you can pour a little wine in one person's glass, rinse and keep pouring it from glass to glass. Everyone keeps rinsing and pouring it in the next glass.
Okay.
That's,
Rinse out glasses between.
you tell them to do it. You don't do it. So it's, for them it just takes a second. Each person takes a second. You don't have to, the pourer doesn't have to do it. You just have to remind them, please rinse. And it's normally what the pourer wants to do is when the pourer comes up to the table, then he or she basically reminds them that can you pour this glass out. And then you just want to pour like this. Give it a little twist at the end so you won't drop wine all over. Just don't be nervous. You shouldn't come up with your hand shaking and pour just a small amount. Pour it nice. You get into the groove of it where you just go boom like that, and it's always 50 ml will land up in the glass. Just go boom, and you just give it a little bit of a twist at the end, and that will make sure that the wine doesn't fall out of the glass. Okay, so here we have our Sula Blush Zinfandel. Now, obviously the color here is very important. It's a beautiful pink color. Again, this is not artificial color, but this is a rosé wine. Now, it's important to note, I think that's what actually it is.
Really?
Oh yeah. Look, if you don't know much about wine and you see that this is rose wine, what are you going to think?
Yes.
And because in India, you're used to having also rose flavored sweets and things like that, and it looks a little bit like roux afza. So you want to, you want to make that point that this is no roses or anything in it. What it is basically is it's a red grape. Rosé is made out of a red grape, but what happens when you make red wine? Basically, the color is all in the skins. It's not in the juice. So what you do when you make a red is you mix the skins up with the juice and keep mixing it up, and you extract all the color and you get this deep red. In the case of a rosé, you just keep the skins in contact with the juice for a short amount of time, normally about 12 to 24 hours. And that's what gives you just that pink color instead of giving you a deep red color. So it's made out of a red grape, but it's much lighter than a red wine. It's a beautiful summer wine. It's a very traditional wine to be drinking also during brunches or when you're outdoors, at a picnic or something like that. This wine just goes really well. So now when you take a whiff of this wine, this aroma really hits you like no other wine that you've tasted so far. It's just a deep, rich, very fruity aroma. And now basically we're smelling berries and we're smelling strawberries. Let's test the theory. And that is the spot. So, a good wine with chicken, a good, you're sitting at brunch, what better than a glass of rosé. Rosé has suddenly, there's been a huge surge in its popularity in the last year or two. Suddenly in countries like England and France, people are drinking huge amounts of rosé. Rosé had fallen out of favor in the 90s. People are just rediscovering the joys of rosé, It's fashionable. I mean, wine, like everything else, there are fashion. Yeah, and right now it's very fashionable.
In the old world, wine country especially.
Yeah. There are many different kinds of rosés. Our rosé tends to be a little bit sweet on the sweeter side. The rosé can also be made drier. Let's start pouring the next wine. Who's going to pour? Sujit, you going to pour? Come on.
Where is this kind of
Great, you're pouring too much. You can pour a little less than that. So bigger of different varietals. Very easy drinking, light red. You see that also in the color. Very light color compared to the reds that we're going to taste after this. But just, it's an everyday drinker for those who don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money, but still want to drink a nice red wine. This wine hits the spot pretty well.
Why is the color so?
It's just been made in a lighter style, and this style it's more of a sort of a Beaujolais style. If you drink a Beaujolais, a lot of the characteristics are very similar. That's not necessarily saying either good or bad, but the color is very similar.
Is this also blended?
This is blended. Yeah. It's not a single varietal wine, otherwise we name it as one.
why do we drink whites and reds? Because it's stronger.
Yeah, reds in general, they're a little bit deeper in flavor. You normally start with the whites and move to the.
It's a progression in the
Yeah.
moving upwards in the drink.
Okay. Thank you. So first thing we want to observe is the color. So it's a light ruby color, and you can kind of see through the glass, and that tells you. So there's not a lot of color development in that. Some of the bigger wines, the more expensive wines, they're inky black wines. You're never going to be able to see through the glass. If you hold up your glass against your white napkin, you'll see straight through that, all the way down into the napkin. Yeah. So, not a very complicated wine, just for people who want to drink red but don't necessarily want to get into a very complex red. Easy drinking, enjoyable, light, fruity. It will be slightly less alcohol. 11.5, so it's a low alcohol red. 12.5. This one I remember. 12.5. It's still lower alcohol, but not tremendously. It's almost like a cross between a rosé and a red. It's a very light red. And not a lot of tannin. It's basically a young, fruity red. Simple, not very complicated. Let's move on and start doing Cab Shiraz. Neil, you want to pour that? You didn't pour yet, right? Yeah. Did you read about Georges Duboeuf last week? He got fined for blending non-Beaujolais wines into his Beaujolais. Yeah, so he's thinking of taking the government to court. He says that no, I didn't do it. Xavier, did you read that? Georges Duboeuf is the and your Shiraz. This is obviously a blend of two varieties, Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz Hanks. Shiraz, please note, is the same as Syrah. In France, it's called Syrah. Shiraz is pretty much the same grape, but normally the New World countries, especially Australia, they've decided to call it Shiraz. Shiraz was actually the original name because this is one of the first ever wine grapes, and it comes from Shiraz in Iran. So Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, these were the places where wine grapes were first cultivated. But of course, France is the pioneer of most of these varieties. Syrah, just to give you a little background, is a Rhone variety. I'll just tell you a little bit about varieties. Syrah is a Rhone variety, typical Rhone variety. Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon are your typical Bordeaux varieties. So most of your Bordeaux wines are Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot. We're not tasting a Merlot today. And there's a third grape, but that's not as important. Most of the Bordeaux whites are Sauvignon Blanc, sometimes a little bit of Semillon that goes into that. Chenin Blanc is a Loire variety. It goes into wines called Vouvray, and also done in a very light, fruity style. They also make sparkling wines. In fact, the vineyard that Mr. Malia has just bought, which is Vouvray, is a Chenin Blanc sparkling wine vineyard in the Loire. So most of these varieties, it's France that has really domesticated them and then brought them to the level that we understand the grape and the flavor today. But then of course, if you look at Syrah today, Australia is the one who's doing the most exciting things today with Syrah. New Zealand is the one who's doing the most exciting things with Sauvignon Blanc. So it just depends. Napa Valley, Cabernet Sauvignon, etc. etc. Burgundy, which is the other great wine region, is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. These are varieties that don't really grow so well in India right now, but all the other varieties do. Okay, so Cabernet Shiraz is a blend that's been made very popular in Australia. You'll see a lot of Australian Cabernet Shirazes, and this has 80% Shiraz, 20% Cabernet Sauvignon, right? 80% Shiraz. That's good that we got that right. In our first year, it was the other way around. 80% Shiraz, 20% Cabernet Sauvignon. Always remember. Yeah. And now this is a much more traditional red wine than the Madeira red you had. If you look at the color, there's absolutely no comparison. You can barely see through the middle of it. Only on the edges you'll be able to see through a little bit. It's a more inky, really dark red color, and that's what you want to see out of a more expensive red wine. But again, a fairly young wine. And again, this wine is meant, and you can see on the edges, you see a purple tinge to it. If that tinge becomes more brown, then you know that that wine is aged more. But this is a young red. Again, done mostly in stainless steel with only a little bit of oak. So cheers.
Sorry, I missed that.
Mostly stainless steel with a hint of oak. You just put it in a little bit of neutral oak for a little time.
During the process.
Yeah, not necessarily new oak. You can't keep changing the name every year.
I just have a curiosity. Using Indian climate, it's a little harder to get the disease, right? Infection, bacteria, like that. So, it's not that much of a concern, or not again?
No. With reds, I mean, it's just tradition, and it just proves that oak and red integrates really nicely. So you want to give it that slight oak touch without making it over oak. So yeah, your hygiene, your cleaning and all your that has to be completely up to the mark. Otherwise, you're going to suffer problems. And so you have to keep rejecting every year a number of the barrels you have. It's expensive. Oak is really expensive. We import all our oak from France and from the US, and it's very expensive. But you still have to reject every year part of your old oak. So when you first buy an oak barrel, it imparts a lot of oak in its first year, and that's new oak. In its second year, also it imparts a lot of oak, but not as much as the first year. After your 2 years are done, it hardly imparts any oak flavor, and then it's called neutral oak. So this wine is mostly neutral oak. There's not a lot of new oak happening.
So how long do they last?
5 years. Generally, you don't want to use them beyond that. Then they become tabletops for tasting notes and stuff like that. And we have some lovely oak barrels available at the winery if anyone wants to purchase them. So they're available for purchase. So please get in touch with one of our representatives who will hand you a card after the tasting. Always remember. So all you guys need to have your cards on you when you're doing the tasting. You need to be handing those out. So any comments on the Cab Shiraz? Fatima? Nixon?
It's a primary light touches of oak. Red fruit, only plum. It's smoky.
Yeah, it's got that slight smoky and slight peppery thing happening right at the end, a little bit like a little white pepper, which we are not so used to actually, but and it's got that smoky edge to it. So it goes really well with grilled meats, barbecue. This wine would go fantastically. I would prefer it to Dindori and to Satori for barbecue. So anywhere where you're using a bit of charcoal to grill your meats, or you're doing tandoori meats, this wine goes well. And in general, when you give pairing suggestions for the wine, keep the suggestions general. Don't get into really specific stuff because you're limiting. You keep it general, you say meat, you don't say necessarily lamb or beef or chicken, etc. When you say meat, that encompasses a lot and it gives people flexibility to work with. So that's important. Let's get on to Dindori. We're going to go to tuna, so I'm going to have to hurry this through. Move on to the Dindori and drink down the, I've got the late harvest as well. You guys have a wine on the table for, yeah, come if you want to join us. Anything new or have you had our dessert wine?
I have not, but I heard you had a new gin, right? Indori is around like very conducive to good wine growing. Also, if you've noticed, we chill this wine slightly. Okay, we recommend red wine at around 15 degrees. You must have heard like red wines we supposed to be at room temperature, but if you notice, this wine is slightly chilled. Just before the tasting, I just like you to swirl the wine in your glass
Full body enough to
and stop.
be a legit gin.
Okay, look at the inside of the glass.
Hi, how are you doing?
Okay, what you see trickling down are the tears on the legs of the wine. That basically denotes the viscosity. Okay, so the more thicker and more slowly the tears trickle down, the more viscous or heavy body the wine is.
Thanks. It's good, huh? I'm new red.
So swirl the wine, let's all sip it.
Are you asking for wine still as a glass?
Any comments?
This is a heavy bodied wine because it's
Yeah, it's a little more body than the wine. There's the wine side. Okay, you find it trickling down a little slowly.
So I'm going to interject a little bit here. Yeah, so Nixon was talking a little bit about Dindori. Dindori is a sub-district of Nasik. Beautiful, rolling hills, red soil, red gravelly soil, and similar to Napa, also very similar to Terra Rossa in Australia. I think that's the comparison. So similar to a McLaren Vale or a Coonawarra in Australia. And very iron rich and therefore an amazing site for premium red wine. And I feel that this area, Dindori, is going to start being known as the Napa or the Coonawarra of India in time to come. And we've sort of discovered Dindori and we've made it our own, and so we've named the label actually after the area where these grapes are grown. And this is, I really feel, where India's highest end red wine is going to come from.
besides being rocky, what is the thematic story that makes it so special?
Just clear, clean, beautiful air, rolling hills, lots of water, so lots of dams and lakes and stuff. And yeah, that's about it.
For example, like I've learned when you have a lot of water, it's sometimes not the best for grape because the roots don't dig deep enough, so it doesn't get all the flavors to So
Okay, that's slightly different. Yeah, I mean that's if there's a lot of water in the vineyard. I'm just saying the area has a lot of lakes, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of water in the soil, or we're watering a lot.
With the climate.
But the climate is beautiful. Yeah, it's completely underdeveloped virgin, but the prices of land there are going through the roof. So taste this wine, and this is Sula's pride and joy. It's our reserve red. It's the Dindori Reserve Shiraz. You all get a good look at the label. Show the label off, let everyone see it. And we feel that it's India's best red, though there are others who might have other things to say about that. But definitely with this wine, we're pushing the envelope for red wine made in India. And if you taste it, you just get. Nita, you want to join us? If you taste it, it's lush, you know, it's slightly velvety in the mouth,
It's a beautiful.
you know, and then it's sort of lip smacking at the end. It just makes you like want to drink more, which is always good.
It's a deep flavor.
Yeah, and it's very deep, and if you look at it, it's also, it has more weight
Yeah.
even than the Cab Shiraz. You can just see that also in the, now this wine is slightly less filtered also than our regular reds, and there's a reason for that. Less filtration, less work on the wine, less stripping of flavor, so more flavorful. And so we don't filter this wine all the way down, it's slightly unfiltered.
That's the reason why it's more local.
No, that's not the reason why it's more oaky. This wine actually spends about a year's time in oak before we release it.
Comes out very clearly.
Yeah, so it is. So this is the only one of our wines at this point that we age in the winery and for a while in bottle before releasing it. And that's what gives it the complexity and the richness and the marriage with oak that's so important. Yeah. Can I have some more? It's aged, so that's it, Dindori Reserve. This wine also doing fantastically well in London, in Michelin star restaurants in London. No, about a year and a half. So right now, about, I'm going to take that back. It's about 14 months of aging. Yeah, the problem is that it's selling too fast. So we have to choose between releasing it slightly earlier or letting it run out. This guy's going to run out in the market. That's preferable than releasing it early. So that's our Dindori, Pride and Joy. You know, this is a wine that it's not really discounted or anything in the market. You know, what you see is what you get. Just a lovely wine. And this is a wine that you can buy and put down in your wine cellar and can happily age. This wine just gets more and more complex, gets better and better in bottle. And this is probably the only wine that we make which we would recommend laying it down for a year, drinking it down for a year. Oh yeah, it just gets better and better. So we've got a library of wines. This our first Dindori was 2003, and the 2003s that we taste now just taste so good. Let's move on to the late harvest. Who hasn't poured yet?
No, I
have
Nisha? Let's use the white wine glass. They're ready to be talking to the people about where the wines are available, handing out cards, giving email addresses, talking about tasting room as being a most amazing and beautiful place to come to drink wine. By the way, have you guys heard of, we've got our new wine bar. It's a beautiful place, come over and drink some wine and eat some great food with us. So add that in there for all the tastings. Let's put that down in the notes, yeah. You can talk about Nasik a little bit. I've not really talked about the winery. Let's talk a little bit about that. We have a beautiful state-of-the-art winery. Our vineyards are at Nasik. Just a 3.5-hour drive from here. We do a fantastic wine tour there. We do tastings there. So please come by. We'll help you start it out. Just send us an email. Dessert wine. This wine has to be tasted. It does not move on its own from the shops. It's a complicated late harvest Chenin Blanc. People don't know what it is. It's a little bit expensive. It needs work. Almost, I would say 90% of Indians tasting this wine love this wine. It's sweet, it's flavorful, and then so you have to include late harvest in each and every tasting that you do. Very important. That's the way you're going to sell this wine. What we found, I'm going to repeat, what we found in our tasting room at the winery is that anyone who tastes this wine buys it. Our winery tasting room is our biggest single outlet for late harvest, and that's saying something because not every other wine. Shah wines, for example, is probably our biggest for everything. But in the case of late harvest, we sell more at the winery, and that's because people are tasting it. So you want to taste this wine. So what are the notes, Norton?
It's sweet.
Bit sweet, but any fruit you're getting?
Lemon.
A little bit lemony, sure, yes. Honey, absolutely. Pineapple. So you've got pineapple, honey, lemony. These are I would say are the main sort of three. Little lychee, yeah. So, cheers, guys. Now, just a word about dessert wine. You can interpret dessert wine in two ways. One, that it goes well with dessert, or you just have it as a dessert. So, if you have a dessert wine on your wine list, sometimes you might prefer not to have a dessert. You want to have one more glass of wine, you can have a glass of dessert wine instead. So it sort of does as a dessert. Again, now if you look at the color of the wine, very golden, as I was saying earlier. You know, a late harvest or a dessert wine will be much more golden. That's not necessarily because it's oxidized, but the grapes that this wine is made out of almost become raisins, bedanas, manukkas on the wine before you press it and get the wine out of it. And it's got a high amount of residual grape sugar in it. No sugar added. Okay, quick questions. I'll take two questions. You want the half bottle? This wine is only available in half bottles. Yes, that's right. In general, it's a higher alcohol, sweeter wine, so you won't drink as much of it. Normally, you'll have one glass and that'll be enough. So there's no point in making it in full bottles. Because it's picked really ripe. The vines, the grapes have shriveled almost. I should have said that. I should have given them a bit of a yeah, this is yeah. Okay, can I have a chat with you for 2 seconds before I get out of here? Guys, I'm getting out of here. I'm off to Pune. Enjoy your weekend. We got wines left. Please enjoy. Okay, I hope you guys got something out of this. And I want to see everyone doing very professional, high-end tastings. You got it? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Swati, maybe the three of you and we can have a chat just for 2 minutes. Okay, now it's not the Time magazine, it's Time magazine. So when you say Bombay's boom in the Time magazine, no, it's just in Time magazine. So remove the, give me a pen. Remove the from here and here. The here. Why have you put in all these do's? I wrote the copy for you.